Arabica. The entire global coffee industry was built on one bean. Arabica makes up roughly 60 to 70% of all coffee produced worldwide, and chances are that any coffee you have genuinely enjoyed in the last few years came from this plant. So why is that? The flavor is smooth, naturally low in bitterness, and complex enough to appeal to almost everyone, ranging from chocolate and caramel to stone fruit and flowers. It was also the first coffee species to be commercially cultivated and traded on a global scale, giving it a 300-year head start on every other variety. Arabica originated in the highlands of Ethiopia centuries ago, before spreading through Yemen and eventually across every coffee-growing region on Earth. The plant is delicate, sensitive to temperature, and difficult to farm at scale, which is why serious coffee people treat it with the same reverence others reserve for fine wine grapes. Robusta. Robusta does not have the reputation of Arabica, but it has something Arabica does not: toughness. The plant resists pests, survives heat, and produces higher yields at lower altitudes, making it far easier and cheaper to grow across difficult climates. The flavor is stronger, darker, and more bitter, with earthy and woody notes that divide coffee drinkers sharply. Vietnam built one of the world's largest coffee industries almost entirely on Robusta during the late 20th century. In espresso blends, Robusta earns its place not for flavor complexity, but for one specific quality. It produces a thicker, more stable crema than Arabica alone, which is why many Italian roasters still include it in their house blends and always have. Liberica. Liberica is the odd one out in the coffee world, a species so unlike Arabica or Robusta that tasting it for the first time can genuinely confuse people who think they know what coffee tastes like. The beans are noticeably larger and irregularly shaped, and the flavor moves through smoky, floral, fruity, and woody notes, sometimes all at once. Liberica originated in West Africa and became critically important during the 1890s when coffee leaf rust devastated Arabica crops globally and growers scrambled for an alternative. It never fully replaced Arabica, but in countries like the Philippines and Malaysia, it took deep cultural root and never left. In the Philippines, a Liberica variety called Kaping Barako is considered a national treasure. Excelsa. Excelsa spent most of its history classified as its own coffee species before scientists eventually placed it within the Liberica family, a decision that pleased almost nobody who had been drinking it. The flavor is highly unusual, tart, fruity, and layered with a sharp contrast between dark roasted depth and bright acidic lift that makes it behave differently from anything else in a blend. Most coffee drinkers have probably tasted Excelsa without knowing it because it is rarely sold alone and almost always used to add complexity to blends in Southeast Asia. It remains one of the least understood and most underappreciated coffees in the world, which in specialty coffee circles is sometimes the highest compliment you can give something. Geisha. No coffee bean in recent history caused more disruption to the specialty coffee world than Geisha. The variety originated in Ethiopia and spent decades as an obscure regional bean before farms in Panama began producing it in the early 2000s, and everything changed. The flavor is extraordinarily delicate, floral, citrusy, almost tea-like, with jasmine and bergamot notes that make it taste less like coffee and more like something that should be served in a porcelain cup at a very expensive hotel. When Geisha first appeared in international competitions, it won everything, repeatedly, and at auction, some batches sold for thousands of dollars per kilogram. Many people who try high-end Geisha for the first time describe the experience as genuinely confusing because nothing about it fits their existing idea of what coffee is supposed to taste like. Blue Mountain. Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee built its reputation on restraint. Where most celebrated coffees are known for intensity or complexity, Blue Mountain is prized for the opposite, a smoothness and mildness so clean and balanced that bitterness almost disappears entirely. The beans grow in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica at high elevations, wrapped in cool temperatures and almost constant mist, conditions that slow the cherry's development and concentrate its flavor in an unusually gentle way. Japan fell so deeply in love with Blue Mountain that for decades the country imported the vast majority of Jamaica's entire production, leaving very little for anyone else. Because supply is tightly limited and the name has been counterfeited so frequently, official certification was eventually introduced to protect what goes into the bag. Peaberry. Most coffee cherries contain two beans that grow flat against each other inside the fruit. Occasionally, through a natural mutation, only one bean develops, and with no companion to press against, it grows round instead of flat. This is a peaberry. What makes it interesting beyond the shape is what some roasters and enthusiasts believe happens to the flavor. With all the cherry's nutrients concentrated into a single bean rather than split between two, the result is supposedly sweeter, brighter, and more intense. Peaberries occur naturally in only a small percentage of cherries and need to be sorted by hand because their round shape behaves differently in a roaster. Tanzania produces some of the most sought-after peaberries in the world, and they are almost always sold separately and at a premium. Kopi Luwak. Kopi Luwak is probably the most famous and most debated coffee in the world. The beans are eaten by Asian palm civets, small cat-like animals native to Southeast Asia, partially digested and later collected from their droppings, cleaned, and roasted. The idea sounds alarming until you learn that it originated not as a novelty, but as a necessity. During Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia, local farmers were forbidden from harvesting coffee for themselves and began collecting what civets had eaten in the wild instead. The digestive process was eventually found to alter proteins in the beans in a way that supposedly reduces bitterness and creates a smoother cup. Whether the flavor actually justifies prices that can reach hundreds of dollars per kilogram is a debate the specialty coffee world has never fully resolved. What is less debatable is the ethical concern. High demand led to civets being kept in small cages and force-fed cherries. And truly, wild Kopi Luwak, while it still exists, is extraordinarily rare. Black Ivory. Black Ivory coffee takes the same basic concept as Kopi Luwak and scales it up considerably. The beans pass through elephants. Produced in Thailand in partnership with elephant sanctuaries. The coffee works on the principle that an elephant's digestive system breaks down proteins in the coffee bean during a slow fermentation process that can last up to 70 hours. The result is said to be exceptionally smooth and low in bitterness, with earthy and chocolatey notes that develop during the long journey through the animal. Because elephants consume enormous quantities of food every day, the beans become thoroughly mixed with other plant matter, and sorting them afterward is exactly as labor-intensive as it sounds. A portion of the proceeds goes directly toward elephant welfare, which means that drinking a cup of Black Ivory coffee at several dollars per gram supports one of the stranger conservation funding models in existence. Jacu Bird. The Jacu Bird coffee story began as a pest problem. On a farm in the Brazilian state of Espírito Santo, wild Jacu birds, large ground-dwelling birds native to South America, began raiding the coffee crop and eating the ripest cherries before the farmers could harvest them. Where most producers would have simply driven the birds away, one farmer named Henrique Sloper noticed something worth paying attention to. The birds were selecting only the most perfectly ripe fruit, with a precision no human picker could easily match. The beans recovered from their droppings were cleaned, roasted, and tasted, and the result was smooth, naturally sweet, and low in bitterness in a way that made the farm's regular coffee seem ordinary by comparison. Jacu Bird coffee remains one of the rarest and most unusual specialty coffees produced anywhere in the world, made in tiny quantities by birds who have no idea they are doing something remarkable.